The wind had a memory to it, scraping over the dry earth like it was looking for what had been lost. There was a certain kind of silence that only came in the far edges of Arizona territory, out near the abandoned stagecoach routes and the cottonwoods that grew like forgotten sentinels along a dried creek bed. It was the kind of silence that didn't ask for company. And Harlan Roan had learned long ago how to live inside it without going mad. Most mornings, he woke before the sun touched the horizon, stirred by the smell of pine ash and the twitch of old dreams. And that morning, in the spring of 1887, he felt it before he saw it, something wrong in the wind. The mare, Dusty, shifted outside the window, not startled, just uneasy. Her ears twitched forward, nostrils flared. Harlan poured the last of the coffee from the kettle, black and thick as river mud, and sipped it slowly, letting it sit heavy on his tongue before swallowing. He set the cup down and stepped into his boots, tugged on his coat without hurrying. The wind carried something with it, burnt wood. Maybe. Or blood. Something low and acrid beneath the ordinary scent of dust and prairie grass. By the time he saddled Dusty and followed her gaze out toward the low ridge, the sun had begun to color the world in thin amber light, slicing through the clouds like a knife through linen. Beyond the ridge lay the old road where wagons once ran west. Before the mines dried up and the mail stopped coming, now it was just wheel ruts in the sand, scattered bones, and the occasional hawk shadow. That morning, it was more. He found the wreckage where the land bent, near a patch of low mesquite and the remains of an old stone fire circle. The smell hit him first sharp, metallic, charred. Then the sight of it, splintered wagon wheels scattered like ribs across the sand. Canvas shredded and flapping in the breeze like ghost skin. Scorch marks kissed the ground in a wide arc, and ash floated gently where campfires had once burned. Bodies, some covered by what was left of bedrolls or shawls, some not covered at all. Harlan didn't count. There was no use in numbers. Death was its own measure. One man's boots were melted into the coals, his face buried in what was left of the fire pit. Another still clutched a small doll made of string. Raiders, or worse. Harlan moved through the camp like smoke, quiet, slow, not out of fear, but respect. Dusty stayed just beyond the crest, snorting but holding her ground. He knelt beside a lump of burned fabric, then froze. Movement. Not enough to call motion, but enough to call life. A soft twitch beneath a piece of scorched canvas. He pulled it back slowly. She was curled there, half buried in ash and torn velvet, her face a smear of blood and soot, hair tangled like storm cloud and dirt. Her hand was outstretched, fingers bent in a grasp for something long gone. She was older than he expected, not a child from a Sunday school wagon, but a woman, grown, wounded, elegant even in ruin. Her collar still bore the frayed edge of lace, her left glove torn, her right still buttoned with pearl. And yet there was no mistaking it. She was hanging on by something thinner than thread. Harlan didn't speak. There was no sound in him. He simply reached down, slow as breath, and slid his arms beneath her. She barely weighed more than memory. Dusty didn't protest when he lifted her up, though the mare snorted at the scent of blood. Harlan mounted with practiced ease, the woman limp against his chest, and turned back toward the line of cottonwoods that marked home. The wind followed them all the way down the ridge, whispering like it knew a secret it wasn't ready to tell. The cabin sat where it always had, snug against the base of the hill, hidden by trees and years of solitude. Harlan had built it after Mary died, hammering grief into every board, measuring the roof by how loud the rain had been the night she passed. He laid the woman on the cot Mary had once occupied. The sheets were clean, though faded. Her breath was shallow but steady, the kind of steady that had to be watched, not trusted. He fetched water, boiled it on the stove, and ran a cloth across her forehead, cleaned the blood from her mouth, wrapped her hand in oil-soaked linen where the skin had split open. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask anything. By nightfall, the fire was down to coals, flickering orange beneath the last of the sycamore logs. Outside, the crickets had begun their choir, joined by a single owl mourning to the moon. Harlan sat beside her, back to the wall, arms crossed, his long legs stretched out in front of him like they had nowhere left to go. He didn't sleep. He hadn't meant to stop sleeping. But some things just happen when you live alone long enough. You stop asking the world to give you dreams, and it stops giving them. Instead, he watched the rise and fall of her chest. Once. The wind knocked against the shutter like it wanted in. Once. Her hand jerked, and her fingers clawed at the blanket, like they were remembering something that didn't want to be remembered. But she didn't wake, and he didn't move. Sometime in the early hours, just before the sky began its long blue stretch toward morning, her eyes opened. It was not sudden. It was not dramatic. They simply opened, quietly, like someone remembering how. They didn't focus right away, didn't recognize him or the room or the fire. But they didn't hold fear, either. Just exhaustion. She tried to speak. He leaned forward. "Don't try," he said. Voice low, slow. The kind of voice carved from years of silence. "You're safe." Safe. It was a word that sounded too big for the room. Her eyes fluttered. She looked around the stove, the single chair, the rifle resting against the wall, the old portrait of a woman long gone. She nodded once, not to him, just to herself. When he brought her a cup of water, she held it with both hands, trembling. She drank slowly, as if the water might disappear before she finished. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, stood, and returned to the chair by the stove. For a long while, they said nothing. Then finally, "You got a name?" She looked at her gloved hand. Silence. "My name, I don't remember." A lie. He could taste it in her jaw, in the way her throat moved after. But he didn't press. "Then I guess we'll wait till you do." Outside, the wind changed again. It wasn't louder, but it sounded different, like it knew someone had come back from a place you weren't supposed to return from. And Harlan Roan sat by the fire, watching the woman who had fallen out of the ashes. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what had happened out there on that ridge. But as the light turned the corner of the window gold, he said something not aloud, not even to himself, but to the world. Let her stay. He didn't expect an answer. But sometimes, the land listens in its own way. And as the coyotes called to each other from the hills, the woman stirred once more, a soft sound slipping from her lips. He didn't catch the word, but he caught the moment. And in that moment, he stopped being alone. He doesn't know her name, but as the storm breaks outside and the coyotes cry in the dark, he whispers one aloud. "Anyway, stay. Whoever you are," he whispered. "But if you don't by morning, at least tell me who I buried." Some women arrived with perfume and parasols. This one arrived with smoke in her hair and silence like a weapon. The sun pushed through the window slow that morning, not quite brave enough to light the corners of the room. The air still carried the smell of boiled linen, oil from the lantern, and something else beneath a scent of burnt cloth and dried blood, faint but stubborn. The cot creaked as the woman stirred, one hand flexing like she was trying to remember what it meant to hold something. Her eyes opened again, slower this time, more aware. She blinked at the ceiling, then turned her head and saw the man sitting nearby, not watching her, not speaking, just there. He hadn't moved since the night before. She tried to sit up. It came too fast, and the breath caught in her throat like it had hit something sharp. Harlan stood without speaking, stepped to the cot, and placed one hand on her shoulder, the other steadying her back. "You're still healing," he said. "Ain't no rush." She blinked again, then looked down. Her fingers were wrapped in fresh cloth, the skin red and swollen beneath. She shifted her jaw, touched the corner of her mouth, winced. "Water?" he asked, already moving. He handed her the tin cup, cool in her hands. She drank slow, both palms wrapped around it like a prayer. The tremble in her fingers didn't stop. Outside. The birds had begun to sing, not with joy, but with the habit of it, life continuing whether anyone asked it to or not. The woman finished the water and looked at him. Her eyes, though rimmed in dark fatigue, were sharp underneath, not wild, not frightened, just measuring. She opened her mouth, cleared her throat. "My name." He raised a hand, not abrupt but firm. "No need yet." She hesitated, closed her lips again, looked away. He went to the stove, stirred the pot that had been warming since before dawn. Onion broth, light and plain, a little salt, nothing heavy. He poured it into a tin bowl and brought it to her. She didn't thank him, but she took it. They sat like that for a while, one eating slow, the other not eating at all, just listening to the tick of the kettle as it cooled, and the whisper of wind through the crack in the window. She finished the broth and placed the bowl carefully on the table beside her. Her hands stayed folded in her lap after, fingers curling into each other, like she didn't trust them to be still on their own. "I dreamed," she said, voice hoarse, broken like something long unused. "I dreamed I was still in the fire, that it had hands." Harlan looked at her. "Dreams don't know time," he said. "They only know what still hurts." She stared at him then. Not long, but long enough. "I don't remember my name," she said again, slower. This time, he didn't reply, because he could hear the lie in it, and she knew he could. So they let it sit between them, not heavy, not sharp, just there. He stood again, walked to the window, checked the light on the ridge, then to the stove, added another log, then back to the chair by the wall. He didn't ask her where she came from. He didn't ask her why she was alone out there. And she didn't offer. Outside. The wind carried the scent of horses and dry sage. Inside. The fire cracked, soft and low. The woman lay back on the cot, closed her eyes, but she did not sleep. That afternoon, Harlan went outside, chopped kindling, fed the chickens, checked the mare's hooves. He didn't look back at the house until sunset. Didn't need to. When he came in, she was awake again, sitting upright, wrapped in the wool blanket, staring at the photograph on the wall. "Your wife?" she asked, voice quieter now, but no longer frail. He nodded. "Mary. She looks kind." She was. Neither said more. He lit the lantern, poured a second cup of broth. This time. She took it with one hand, the right one, gloved still, though the fabric had dark stains along the cuff. Her left remained wrapped, resting in her lap. "Do you play?" he asked after a moment. nodding toward the corner where a dusty dulcimer sat atop an old crate. She looked over. I used to. Music sticks longer than most things, like the smell of bread or someone's laugh. She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on the instrument longer this time, after dinner. He sat in his chair. She lay down again, slower this time, mindful of her ribs. The silence stretched, but not like it did before. Now it was something shared, like a blanket between them. The firelight touched her face, softened the bruises, brought out the edge of something noble, not royal, not proud, just shaped, like someone who had once walked in rooms where people stepped aside. She watched the flames dance. Then suddenly, quietly, like a stream breaking through frost tears, slid down her cheek. She didn't sob, didn't shake, just wept, like her soul had waited for a room quiet enough to do it. Harlan didn't move, didn't speak. He only watched the way the tears caught in the hollow of her neck and vanished into the wool. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely more than breath. I wasn't supposed to live. His answer came slow. Most folks who do weren't. She wiped her face with the edge of the blanket, took a breath that almost caught in her chest, but made it out whole. I wasn't running, she whispered. He looked at her, and she didn't meet his eyes. I was leaving. There's a difference, he said. She nodded once, and that was enough. The fire burned low. Outside, an owl called across the ridge. The night closed in soft and steady. And for the first time since the storm, and the wagon, and the fire, the woman who had no name let her eyes close without fear. And he, for the first time in months, let his own eyes rest not in sleep, not yet, but in something close to peace. The next morning, he rose before the sun, as always. Stepped outside into the chill air, breathed in the scent of wet earth and ash from the night's fire. The grass was damp beneath his boots. The sky wore a thin blue veil, not yet dawn, but not fully dark. When he returned, she was already sitting up, hair tied back loosely, a blanket still around her shoulders. She looked toward the window, toward the ridge. Her voice came like it belonged in the room now. You got a name? He turned, surprised she'd asked. Harlan Roan. She repeated it, like tasting it. Harlan? Then silence again. He poured her coffee. She drank it with both hands. She didn't ask more, and he didn't tell her about the medal he kept in the drawer, or the way Mary's shawl still hung by the door, untouched. Instead, he asked, You strong enough to step outside? She nodded, wrapped the blanket tight, and together, they stepped out into the morning. The sky was wider than it should have been, she thought. The grass moved in waves. A single bird broke across the horizon. She stood still, letting the breeze lift her hair. To see the sky, she whispered. I needed to know it still turned. It does, Harlan said, whether we ask it to or not. She looked at him then fully, not through pain, not through haze. Her eyes were the color of something lost in rain. Stormlight. Maybe. I shouldn't be alive. Maybe not, but you are. She turned back toward the land, voice barely there. I don't know who I am now. He didn't rush, didn't answer too quick. Then don't rush it, he said. Let it come when it's ready. They stood side by side, facing the world that had not stopped turning, and something passed between them, not affection, not yet, not comfort, just a thread, thin as gossamer, tight as breath, and behind them, the cabin waited no longer just a place to hide, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something else. He places the empty tin cup on the table and says, We wait. Miss. Sometimes the name comes back slower than the wounds. The piano had no business in a frontier cabin, but when Clara touched it, the dust remembered the song. The wind had gone still by the third week, but the quiet had not left the land. It hung around the porch and the cottonwoods, curled into the cracks of the cabin walls. Even the birds sang less often now, as if the world was listening to something smaller and closer, like breath, or memory, inside the cabin. The woman who hadn't yet given her name had begun moving more each day, not quickly, not with ease, but with purpose. Each step was steadier, and though she still woke with the past tangled in her hair, she no longer asked what day it was. Instead, she moved with an unspoken rhythm. She helped peel potatoes. She folded the extra blanket without being asked. She sat on the porch and let the wind tangle her shawl, while her eyes studied the land like she was memorizing something no one else could see. And Harlan Roan watched her the way a man watches the sky before it changes, not with worry, but with awareness. She still hadn't offered her name, and he still hadn't asked again. But each evening, the silence between them felt less like an absence and more like a space they shared. On the morning it came, the wind was sharp again, not cold, just clean. Harlan had left at first light, taken Dusty down the old trail to Dry Fork Crossing. He returned near midday, the sun sitting high and firm overhead. She heard the creak of the wagon before she saw it, then the knock of the cart wheel against the cabin's side. Then the door opened. She turned and saw it, a piano. Not new, not fine, upright, old, dusty. The wood dulled by sun and time. Keys yellowed, one chipped near the middle. He was behind it, wheeling it inside with the careful ease of a man carrying something breakable. It barely fit through the doorway. She stood and stared. "I found it at the back of Carlyle's store," he said simply, setting it near the hearth. Said it had been sitting there 10 years. I told him it needed a better room. She blinked. Her lips parted like she might speak, but no sound came. Harlan didn't press, just stepped back and let her look. The piano sat in the corner like it had always been meant to be there, surrounded by rough timber and old shadows, the firelight catching the edges of its curved frame. She moved slowly toward it, ran her gloved hand along the top. It left a line through the dust. "I don't know if I remember," she said, almost too soft to hear. "Don't need to," Harlan said. "Dust knows." That night, she didn't touch it again. She lit the lamp while he stirred the stew. She washed her hands with the soap he'd whittled from pine ash and lye. But she didn't speak again about the piano. The next day passed with the quiet shape of routine. Morning coffee, a walk to the edge of the creek bed, feeding the hens, silence, a shared plate at supper. Then, as dusk settled low, the notes came, soft at first, one then a chord, crooked and halting. The music spilled from the cabin like it wasn't sure it was allowed. Harlan was outside chopping wood when he heard it. He stopped mid-swing, axe still in hand, and turned toward the door. He didn't go in. He didn't need to. The notes were clumsy, some wrong, others nearly right. But they came in a rhythm that had memory behind it, not perfection, but familiarity. Inside, she sat alone at the bench, fingers trembling, her right still gloved, her left wrapped in fresh linen, her body hunched not from fear, but from something heavier, something called remembering. She did not look at the door. She did not stop. The piece was not full. It had no name, but it was hers, and when it ended, she rested her hands on the keys, the weight of her past pressing through her fingertips. She spoke, though no one was in the room. Did you know music could feel like breath? Behind the cabin, unseen in the shadow of cottonwoods. Harlan closed his eyes and said softly to the night, "Only when it stops." Later, by lamplight. They sat across from each other at the table. She didn't speak of the music. He didn't ask. But something had shifted. Subtle. Sure. She held her tea differently now, with one hand resting free. Ungloved, though still wrapped in gauze. The edges of her fingers were raw but healing. When she set the cup down, she left the glove beside it. He didn't touch it. He just looked at her, the firelight brushing her cheek like the gentlest kind of hand. "I used to be someone," she said. "You still are." "No, I mean someone known. Someone that belonged to other people." His jaw moved slightly, but he said nothing. She went on. "I thought if I left them behind, I'd become no one. And maybe that's what I was hoping for. But you didn't." "No," she said, "I didn't." They didn't say more that night. But before she went to bed, she stood at the piano again, pressed one note, held it, and it rang through the dark like a memory unburied. The next morning, the piano was open, the keys polished. A small cloth lay beside it, the kind used for dusting, and the glove was still on the table. She made bread that day, burned the first batch, tried again. He didn't comment, just ate it all the same. Later, as she stood at the window watching the sun dip low over the hills, she asked, "Why did you bring it here?" He didn't look up. "I saw your hands," he said. "The way you moved them when you thought no one was watching. They looked like they missed something." She turned to him. Maybe they did. Then they needed it back. She smiled. It was small, almost gone before it began. But it was there. That night, she did not cover her hands before bed. She left them bare beneath the quilt, pale in the lantern glow, fingers curled gently toward the pillow. And when she fell asleep, there was no tension in her jaw, no twitch in her brow. Just quiet, deep and earned. Outside, the moon climbed high. A coyote called once from the ridge, and Harlan sat by the window, carving the last curve of a new piano bench with steady hands. That night, she places the glove on the table, bare hand, exposed, as if to say, "This is who I was. This is who I might be again." In the spring of 1887, the cottonwoods whispered of names long buried and lives that had not yet begun. By late morning, the air carried a restless weight, the kind that settled into the chest before a storm, even if the sky stayed clear. Harlan noticed it in the way the hens didn't fuss near the feed, in the way Dusty turned her head more often toward the east, ears twitching like she heard something coming. Clara noticed it too, though she didn't say so. Instead, she stood beside the basin, rolling her sleeves back and tying a clean cloth over her hair. She moved with quiet purpose, her fingers no longer trembling as they had before. The scars remained, but she bore them like a woman who had learned not to apologize for surviving. "I'll go into town," she said as she dried her hands. "We're low on flour and thread." Harlan looked up from the doorway where he'd been shaping fence wire. "You sure?" "I need to try," she said, voice low but resolute. "I want to feel normal, even just for a few hours." He nodded once, slowly, but his eyes didn't shift. "If anything troubles you, I leave it, I come back." He nodded again, then passed her the woven satchel. She slipped her arm through the strap, stepped outside, and saddled the old mare herself. When she mounted, her back was straight, her chin high. He watched her ride off, the wind brushing the shawl behind her like a memory trying to catch up. Dry Fork Crossing hadn't changed. It was still a collection of sun-faded wood, dust-heavy storefronts, and tired-looking folk who had grown used to the sound of boots over broken floorboards. Children darted around wagons. A blacksmith hammered metal in the distance, and a dog slept beneath the stoop of the general store. Clara tied the mare outside and stepped into the store, the familiar clang of the bell overhead echoing like a gunshot. The scent inside was as it always had been: tobacco, horsehair, dried grain. She nodded politely to the storekeeper, who gave her a passing glance and a distracted smile. That suited her fine. She moved slowly down the aisle, letting her fingers skim along canvas sacks, brass buttons, and spools of dyed thread. The floorboards creaked beneath her steps. No one looked twice. That, she realized, was what she had feared most, not recognition, but the absence of it, to be erased entirely from the world she had escaped. And then, "My God, is that—" The voice came from behind her, clear, startled, too polished for this side of the territory. She turned. He stood at the counter, mid-conversation with the clerk. His eyes were locked on her now. A well-cut jacket, dusty but expensive, clung to his lean frame. His boots were clean. His revolver looked like it had never been used. He stepped forward. "Baroness," he said, disbelief bleeding into familiarity. "Baroness Bellamy. It is you." She said nothing. Her breath hitched, but her face held. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We thought you were dead. Your uncle, he sent letters everywhere. You were supposed to—" "I am not that woman anymore," she said, each word like glass in her mouth. He blinked, confused. "But what are you doing here, dressed like?" "I am no one," she said coldly, "and I suggest you leave me be." The shopkeeper watched now, eyes narrow but silent. Silas Thorne stared another long moment. His face twisted slightly, not anger, but disbelief, like a man trying to adjust a portrait that no longer looked like the person he remembered. Then he stepped back, tipped his hat. "Baroness," he said again, softer now. "If you say so." She turned and walked out, bread forgotten, thread clutched in her fist. The ride back to Whetstone Hollow was sharp and quiet. Her jaw was set, her hands white-knuckled on the reins. The wind howled once over the ridge, then fell still. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun had shifted west. The air was thicker now, and the light came at slant angles, catching dust in gold bands. Harlan met her at the barn. He didn't speak. She didn't greet him. She dismounted with precision, unfastened the saddle, and began walking toward the cabin. Only when she reached the door did she stop. "There's a man," she said without turning. "His name is Silas Thorne. He recognized me." Harlan came to the porch steps. "What did he call you?" She stood very still. "My full name is Clara Isolde Bellamy," she said. Voice brittle, but strong. Daughter of the late Lord Adrian Bellamy, heir to a line I never asked for. The silence around them thickened. She faced him now. Her expression was not ashamed, it was raw. "I was meant to marry a man I didn't choose. My uncle arranged it. Silas was something like a handler, a reminder of debts unpaid." "You ran," Harlan said. "I fled," she corrected, "with forged papers. Paid passage west under another name. The wagon I rode with wasn't meant to take me to anything better, just far enough that no one would ever call me Baroness again." She stepped closer. The thread she had carried was still in her hand, now slightly crushed. "I never meant to lie to you." "You didn't," Harlan said evenly. "I didn't tell you the truth." "You were surviving," he said. "That's not the same thing." Her throat moved like she was swallowing words that had waited too long to be spoken. "You're not surprised," she said finally. "I'm not the kind of man people lie to because they think I'd understand," he said. "I'm the kind they lie to because they think I'd forgive them when they finally can't." The fire behind her eyes dimmed slightly. Not from shame, from understanding. "I don't know who I am without that name," she whispered. "But I can't carry it anymore either." "You don't have to," he said. "Then who am I?" He stepped closer now, his voice low and sure. "You're the woman who plays piano like breath, who burns bread but tries again, who sleeps with one hand in a fist and the other in prayer. That's who you are." Something broke in her then. But it wasn't pain. It was release. She took one breath, then another, and for the first time, her shoulders fell as if the weight had finally lessened. "I need to bury it," she said. "I'll come with you." They walked together past the barn, down the worn trail to the cottonwood grove. The sky had begun to darken, streaked with violet and gold. Wind stirred the tall grass around them, and birds called low from the trees. She knelt beside the oldest tree, reached into her satchel, pulled out a small velvet pouch. Inside was the ring, gold, with a pale blue stone, her mother's, once, a symbol of everything she had been born into, and everything she had abandoned. She dug a shallow hole with her hands, placed the ring inside, covered it, pressed her palm to the earth. "That part of me is buried now," she said. "But I think something else just started growing." Harlan stood beside her, said nothing, but he didn't need to. They returned to the cabin in silence, not the silence of strangers, but the silence of something understood. The light inside was warm, the fire danced low, the wind had died down, and the whole world felt like it was waiting. Clara stood in the doorway of Harlan's room. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not asking for anything but rest. But can I rest beside you?" The sound of hooves on gravel interrupts the silence. Harlan steps outside. Silas Thorne is there, smiling. "Mighty fine place you've got, Mr. Roan. Shame if she don't come with me." Some men use words like bullets. Silas Thorne didn't raise his gun, but every word landed like a shot. The sun was dipping low when Silas Thorne rode in from the east, dust curling around his horse's hooves like smoke. He carried himself like a man who'd been told what he wanted was already his. The kind who walked through locked doors because he assumed the hinges would understand. Harlan Roan stood just beyond the porch, arms relaxed but firm, feet planted in a way that said this land was his, and had been long enough to outlast storms far worse than men like Silas. Clara watched from inside the cabin, her breath still and even, though her hands gripped the edge of the window frame like she expected it to vanish if she let go. Silas dismounted with an ease that didn't belong out here too smooth, too practiced. He tipped his hat in that same hollow courtesy. "Evening," he said. "Mr. Roan, is it?" Harlan didn't answer. Silas let his eyes sweep across the land, the line of fence, the barn, the field brushed by wind. He smiled. "Mighty fine place you've built here." Harlan said nothing. Silas looked toward the window, as if he already knew exactly where she stood. "You know," he went on, "I was beginning to think the rumors weren't true, that she'd perished out there, like the others. But here she is, not dead, not lost, just hiding." "She's not hiding," Harlan said finally, voice low and sure. "She's healing." Silas gave a short laugh. Healing, that's a soft word for someone who abandoned her name, her family, and her debt. "She owed no one," came Clara's voice, steady and sudden, as she stepped through the doorway. The wind didn't stir, but the trees seemed to hold their breath. Silas turned. His expression softened. but not kindly, more like a man studying something he used to own. You always did have flair, Clara. Even now. I asked you not to call me that. He walked a few slow steps forward, reins still in hand. You belong to a legacy, Baroness, a name. There are people back east still expecting your return. Your uncle sent me with authority. I gave up that name when I crossed the Mississippi, she said. That name fed you, raised you, protected you. It caged me. Silas's face tightened. You're not meant for this, he said, waving a gloved hand toward the cabin. The fields, this kind of life dust and chickens and men with calloused hands. You're meant for velvet, Clara, music halls, marble floors, wine with names longer than your sentences. She stepped forward again, no tremble in her bones. I've tasted both, Silas, and dust doesn't lie the way velvet does. He opened his mouth, but Harlan cut in before he could speak. You're not here for her. Silas arched a brow. Is that so? She's chosen her life, Harlan said. You can ride back and tell whoever sent you that she's not theirs anymore. Silas took a single step closer. The tension in the air coiled like a whip pulled tight. You going to stop me, Roan? Harlan didn't reach for his rifle. He didn't have to. His stance was answer enough. Clara looked at Silas, her eyes no longer holding fear. Just fatigue, the kind that comes when you've run long enough to be done with running. You can stay and find out what it means to threaten someone who's got nothing left to lose, she said. The words landed soft, but sharp. Silas looked at her again. Something in his face shifted the faint flicker of recognition that she wasn't bluffing. He spat once into the dirt, mounted his horse without a word. He looked down at them both from the saddle, expression unreadable. You're wasting your title, he said. Your legacy. I'm living, Clara replied. That's more than I ever did under that name. Silas turned his horse and rode east, back toward the line of the horizon, where the land swallowed men whole and gave nothing back. They watched until the dust settled. Only then did Clara breathe. It wasn't relief, it was release. Back in the cabin. The quiet returned, not heavy, not cold, just still. She sat at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys but not pressing. Harlan made tea without asking, the kettle hissing softly on the stove. After a moment, she struck one chord, then another. The sound was uncertain, but she didn't stop. He returned with the cup and placed it beside her. You all right? He asked. I think so, she said. But I need to do something. She stood, moved to the back room. He heard the trunk creak open. When she returned, she held a velvet pouch. Without a word, they walked outside, down past the barn, toward the cottonwoods. The sky was turning gold again, the light soft and full of dust. A bird circled overhead. She knelt beneath the oldest tree, dug a small hole with her bare hands. From the pouch, she drew the ring gold, blue-stoned, elegant and cold. It caught the sunlight like it remembered who she used to be. She placed it in the dirt, covered it, pressed the earth flat with her palm. That part of me is buried now, she said. I don't want it back. He stood beside her, saying nothing, but she felt at his presence like the bark behind her back, rooted and real. They walked back together, side by side. The door creaked open behind them. The fire flickered in the hearth. A page from her old sheet music fluttered gently on the windowsill, catching the light. Neither of them spoke, because nothing needed saying. Clara stands in the doorway of Harlan's room. Her voice is barely above a whisper. I'm not asking for anything but rest. But can I rest beside you by the time summer edged in from the south? The rhythm of life in Whetstone Hollow had changed slow, steady, and chosen. The mornings came earlier now. The sun rose with a wide yawn across the prairie, touching everything in warm, amber light. The grasses had grown long again, wildflowers pushing through fence cracks and red soil like small rebellions. The creek still whispered low through the cottonwoods, and the breeze carried the scent of cedar wood, horses, and cooled earth. Clara stood at the water pump, her boot sunk slightly into the damp soil, hands working the handle with a rhythm that had become second nature. She wore her sleeves rolled past the elbows, and the braid down her back was loose, catching the wind like a banner. The bucket filled with clean, shining water, and she smiled without realizing it. A year ago, she wouldn't have touched a pump. Now, she barely thought about it. From the barn, Harlan emerged carrying a bundle of cedar logs under one arm, a coil of rope in the other. His shirt was rolled at the sleeves, dust clinging to his forearms, his face shaded beneath the brim of his hat. He'd already fed the chickens and checked the fence line. The broken hinge on the barn gate had been mended with nothing but a bent nail, 2 wooden slats, and the kind of persistence that couldn't be bought in town. Clara turned and caught his gaze. "You're watching me again," she said. "I never really stopped." They shared the morning like that, without rush or announcement. He carried in the wood. She boiled coffee over the stove. The smell drifted through the house and out through the open windows. She cracked eggs into the skillet, flipped the cornbread with one hand. He fixed the drawer that had stuck all spring, sanding the corner with slow, steady strokes. There was peace in their quiet, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something understood. After breakfast, she sat by the piano, not to play not yet, but to dust the keys with a soft cloth. She hummed under her breath, some French lullaby remembered from childhood. The song had no words now, only shape. Harlan leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. "You ready?" She looked up. "For what?" He smiled faintly. "You'll see." They saddled Dusty and packed 2 small satchels. The morning sun had climbed higher, laying stripes of gold across the hills. The sky stretched wide and cloudless, the kind of sky that made a person feel both small and forgiven. They walked side by side, reins in hand, toward the ridge, the same ridge where once she had stood and whispered that she didn't know who she was anymore. Now she walked there, as if she had always belonged. At the top, the cottonwood tree waited, its limbs stretched wide like a blessing. Beneath it sat a smooth, unmarked stone, simple and patient, half sunken into the earth. Clara crouched and brushed her fingers over it. "You ever going to carve something into it?" she asked. Harlan stood beside her, silent for a beat. "Thought about it," he said. "But sometimes things don't need telling. Sometimes the truth just lives there, quiet as anything." She looked up at him. Her eyes were brighter than they'd been in weeks. "You always did understand silence, and you always filled it with music." They stayed there for a while. The breeze moved gently through the leaves, casting shifting shadows across the dirt. The land below spread in every direction, unending, untouched. 3 days after the wedding, a rider came by, didn't stop, just left a letter nailed to the post beside the barn. No signature, just wax, dark red. Inside, a single line written in ink that had bled through the page. "Legacy does not forget." Harlan read it once, then burned it in the stove. Clara didn't ask what it said. She just reached for his hand. The flames curled around the paper, and the wind didn't move. They stood there, side by side, watching the dust swirl and settle. Clara let out a long breath. It wasn't fear leaving her. It was memory. Back in the cabin. She lit the lamp and sat by the piano. She touched the keys once, not to play, but to remember they were there. Harlan brewed tea and brought it to her without speaking. "I used to think the sky was too big," she said, eyes lifting to the window, "that I'd get lost in it." He touched her hand gently. "And now I think I found someone to hold it with." He watched her. "I never thought I'd love again," he said quietly. "Never thought I'd want to." She turned fully to him, eyes full of every word she hadn't dared say aloud. "Marry me," she said. There was no shock in his face, just certainty. "Yes," he said. "I'd marry you 1,000 times in 1,000 lifetimes." The wedding came a week later, under the cottonwood tree. No guests, no preacher, just them, and the wind, and the quiet memory of things left behind. She wore a dress she had sewn herself, soft cotton, pale and clean. He wore his father's boots and a clean shirt with a patch sewn near the hem. They didn't speak vows. They didn't need to. Every moment until now had been one. That evening, they sat on the porch, hands entwined, watching the sun melt behind the hills. "You think the past will ever come back?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "But if it does, it won't find us waiting." She leaned her head on his shoulder and smiled faintly. "No," she said. "It'll find us living. Above them." The stars returned, blinking one by one into the sky's wide canvas. The land around them leaned in not to listen, but to hold. And somewhere beyond the rise, a wild horse stood alone in the moonlight, unchained, unclaimed, free. "It won't find us waiting," he says. And for the first time, the prairie doesn't feel empty. It feels like home. And now the fire has burned low. The stars have risen quiet over the prairie, and the last chords of the story have drifted into the wind like a song no longer played, but still remembered. Because some tales don't end. Not really. They just settle into the soil like old roots waiting to bloom again. And what we've seen, what we've felt, ain't something we put into pages or lock away in boxes. It's something we carry, like a smooth stone in the pocket of a coat worn thin by the years. Because what happened in Whetstone Hollow wasn't loud, wasn't written in papers or praised by crowds. It was quiet and ordinary, like wildflowers blooming in dry ground or the soft creak of a wooden floor when someone who used to run finally stands still. And maybe that's why it lingers, because it was real, because it was earned, because it didn't ask to be remembered, but it is anyway. Just like the old cottonwood standing out past the barn, with its roots wrapped around something buried and sacred. And just like Clara's music, rising soft from the keys and floating through the open window into the dusk. Because some memories hum even when the room goes silent. And if you sit long enough with your heart open, you can hear them a single note, a breath, the way a name feels when it's spoken by someone who means it, not someone who owns it. And Harlan Roan, well, he never carved the stone, but he didn't need to. 'Cause love don't always wear its name on its sleeve. Sometimes it's just the way a man mends a broken hinge or watches the door without asking questions. And Clara, who once walked through fire with lace at her throat and ashes on her hands, didn't reclaim a title. She buried it, and in doing so, found something sweeter than legacy, something wider than name. She found stillness, and stillness like that don't come easy in a world that keeps riding fast and forgetting slow things. But that's the beauty of it, that the world didn't stop for them. And they didn't ask it to. They just made space for something honest inside all that noise. And the past may ride up on a well-saddled horse, sure as the wind shifts and old names echo. But it won't find her waiting. Not anymore. Because she is not who she ran from. She is who stayed, and who chose, and who made bread twice when the first one burned. And that's the kind of redemption you don't need a preacher to witness. Just a man with weathered hands, and a heart big enough to hold someone else's sorrow without breaking. And you know, maybe we've all got a bit of Clara in us, something we're trying to outrun, something buried too deep, something that aches when the wind comes in just right at twilight. And maybe we've all got a bit of Harlan, too, hoping in silence, loving without naming it, waiting for someone to knock who doesn't need permission to stay. And maybe that's what the West teaches us, if we listen long enough, not just about guns and grit and dust, but about gentleness, about the kind of justice that shows up late, but stays long, the kind that doesn't need a crowd to clap, only a cabin and a hand held open. And maybe what matters most ain't the title you wore, but the truth you carried, even when no one believed it, because truth don't need a courtroom to be real, just a heart that won't lay it down. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we remembered how to tell these stories, the quiet ones, the ones with no heroes but plenty of humanity. And if you're sitting there now, letting the final word settle like dust on an old window pane, maybe you'll keep it with you. Maybe you'll light a lantern when the sky turns and tell someone else what happened here. Or maybe you'll just listen a little longer to the wind. And if it sounds like horse hooves or piano notes, well, maybe that's just the land remembering. And if this story stirred something in you, a memory, a sorrow, a name you've carried or laid down, then don't let it vanish when the screen goes dark. Leave a sign, a single mark. Type 1 if you believe quiet love still matters. Type 1 if you think a name can be reclaimed, not with a sword, but with a song. Type 1 if you believe some women are forgotten, not because they are small, but because they are strong in ways the world forgot how to see. And if you're one of the ones who still listens when the wind speaks, we welcome you back next time, right here at Westwind Whispers, where the fire is low, the stories run deep, and the Old West still remembers what it means to forgive, to endure, and to stay.